on whom he did not fail to impress the need of love of God and a holy life, as well as of a right belief. Theodosius transferred him and his followers to the principal church in Constantinople, from which the Arian bishop was expelled, and at the Synod of Constantinople in the year 381 he was formally chosen as bishop of that city. This election was, however, by many regarded as invalid, and it was not long before Gregory, weary of the strife of tongues and longing for rest, resigned his see, and passed the remainder of his life in quiet in his native city or in the neighbouring Arianzus. He died about the year 389. There may be seen in Gregory's varied and troubled life a struggle between the shrinking of a cultivated and sensitive man from the rudeness of ecclesiastical conflict, and the sense of duty, quickened perhaps by the consciousness of power, which impelled him to engage in it. If the time had permitted it he would perhaps have led his life in cot or learned shade; but he lived in an age when no good man could be a mere spectator, and, with whatever shrinking, he came forward to defend the truth. He left behind him discourses, letters, and poems. It is evident that he, like Basil, had a real love for the old classic literature; yet he thought that the true philosophy was to be found in monastic retreat from the world. He assailed Julian in 2 orations which he called Pasquinades. He defended himself before the people of Nazianzus for his reluctance to undertake the priesthood. He preached frequently on festivals; but his most famous sermons were those in which he maintained the divinity of the Son and the Holy Spirit, a subject to which indeed he constantly recurs. His letters, which are written in a clear and simple style, often supply valuable material for history. His poems, especially that which contains a half satirical account of his own life, are of some value for their matter if not for their poetry. Generally, we may say that while Gregory sometimes, when his feelings are roused, rises to true eloquence, his manner is too often artificial, self-conscious, and overloaded with allusions, which are to us obscure. In originality and force of reasoning he is not to be compared with Athanasius or even with Gregory of Nyssa. Gregory of Nyssa was a younger brother of Basil, who about the year 371 sent him, though married, to preside as bishop over the little town of Nyssa in Cappadocia. In the persecution which befell the Nicene party in the reign of Valens, he was deposed by a synod, at the instigation of Demosthenes, the governor of Cappadocia, for various crimes falsely alleged against him, and withdrew into solitude. He returned, however, after the death of Valens, and was received with great joy by the community. Henceforth he was a prominent figure in the Church, and at Constantinople in the year 381 pronounced the funeral oration over the remains of Meletius, who died there, and a few years later over those of the young Pulcheria, daughter of Theodosius I, and the Empress Placilla. He was present at a council in Constantinople in the year 394, and probably died soon after. Gregory of Nyssa is the most philosophical, and the most influenced by the theology of Origen, of the Cappadocian trio. But, however speculative, he was as firm as Athanasius himself in his defence of the orthodox doctrine of the Holy Trinity, and stood by the side of his brother Basil in his contest against heretical dogma. He also wrote on the soul and the resurrection, and a "Catechetic Discourse," intended to show by what methods Jews, Gentiles, and heretics might best be brought to the knowledge of the truth. His disposition seems to have been gentle and amiable, and no one of the Fathers stands more clear of all suspicion of meanness or underhanded dealing. It was not without reason that Vincentius of Lerins pronounced him a worthy brother of St. Basil, and that the Second Council of Nicaea quoted him as of the highest authority. Isidore, head of the monastery near the Pelusiote mouth of the Nile, stands out as one who in an age of fierce controversy never became a mere partisan. While on the whole siding with Cyril of Alexandria, he never lent himself to his violent measures. While he did not wholly reject allegorical interpretation, he yet valued highly the historical method of the school of Antioch. His numerous letters, some of which give spiritual counsel, while others discuss matters of interpretation, are of great value for the history of his time. He lived so ascetically that, says Evagrius, He passed to the angelic life while yet on earth. A remarkable product of the pagan schools of Alexandria is Synesius. Born about the year 370 of a good family at Cyrene in the Egyptian Pentapolis, he studied Neoplatonism under Hypatia, the lady in the doctor's gown, of whom to the last he spoke with affection as his intellectual mother. He afterward visited Athens only to be disillusioned. It had nothing but great memories, he says. The real focus of philosophy was found in Alexandria. From about the year 400 he spent his time principally on his estate at Gyrene, leading the life of a cultivated country gentleman, engaged in agriculture and field sports. He also kept up his philosophic studies, though in this he felt himself isolated in the midst of people who hardly knew whether they were not living in the reign of Agamemnon. It was on another visit to Alexandria that he married a Christian wife, a circumstance which no doubt aided his conversion to Christianity, the history of which is obscure. He was living at Cyrene when, in the year 409, the people oppressed by a brutal governor, begged him, their most influential neighbour, to be their bishop and protector. He was extremely reluctant to undertake this office. Not only was he married and unwilling to separate from his wife, but his views in several points were, he felt, hardly to be reconciled with the current theology of the time, and he was conscious that it would be difficult for him to adopt the decorous life of a bishop. Still his love for his people and the persuasion of Theophilus of Alexandria prevailed. He was consecrated to the see of Ptolemais, and discharged his duty faithfully in a time of great difficulty and distress. He is supposed to have died about the year 414, bowed down by the weight of public and private cares. With him comes to an end the history of the ancient Christianity of the Libyan Pentapolis. Synesius does not belong to the first order of minds, but he is a remarkable example of one whose philosophical principles were coloured and ennobled rather than displaced by Christianity, and he gives a clearer and purer reflection of his school than a stronger character would have done. Nemesius, bishop of Emesa in Syria, is also an instance of a Christianized philosopher. Although, so far as is known, he was a perfectly orthodox teacher, he seems to have turned his attention mainly to the great questions which interest all thoughtful men from age to age: the nature of man, his relation to the universe, the immortality of the soul, the reconciliation of the freedom of the will with the providence and omnipotence of God. His treatise on the nature of man, still extant, shows him to have studied human physiology as well as psychology, and is an important contribution to philosophical theory. Cyril, the famous Archbishop of Alexandria, is the chief representative of an Alexandrian school very different from that which derived its first impulse from Origen. He was the nephew and successor of Bishop Theophilus, by whom he had been brought up, and whom in character he much resembled. His election to the see was not effected without violence, and he had not long occupied it when a quarrel arose between the Archbishop and the Jews which led to his expelling them from the city at the head of a furious mob. Some of Cyril's partisans pelted Orestes, the prefect of the city, with stones, conduct which, rightly or wrongly, brought discredit on their bishop. Cyril entered with great zeal and vigour into the controversies of his time, and it is indeed as a very able controversial leader and writer that he is chiefly known. His best friends will scarcely deny that he was too vehement and imperious to be altogether wise, or even just; but his faults were not inconsistent with great and heroic virtues, faith, firmness, intrepidity, fortitude, endurance, perseverance. We see in the writings which bear the name of Dionysius the Areopagite a Neoplatonic system disguised under terms taken from the language of the Church. God is absolute and unconditioned being. To him no definition, no description, hardly any epithet can properly apply. He is beyond all time and space. He is the source of all existence. But he condescends to develop himself in a series of beings, a heavenly and an earthly hierarchy, through whom on the one hand he reveals himself, so far as may be, to man, and on the other enables man to ascend towards the being of beings himself. At the head of the heavenly hierarchy stands the Holy Trinity. The earthly hierarchy through the sacraments or mysteries of the Church